Dr. Thank you for coming.
Live.
Good morning, all. We are live. We are going to be talking about S6 today, which is the Farm Security Special Funds, the House Ag Committee. And joining us today in the witness seat is...
My name is Hillary Martin. Shall I proceed? Or we'll introduce
to the committee and then, yes, please. We're very much looking forward to it.
Well, my name's Hillary Martin. I live in Burlington and I'm co-owner of Diggers Mirth Collective Farm. We're in the Intervale in Burlington.
Great. And I'm Heather Supina. I represent Windsor 4, which is the towns of Barnard, Pomfret, Bridgewater, and West Hartford. And we'll go to our ranking member.
I'm Leland Morgan. I represent all of Grand Isle County and the western portion of the town of Milton, where I live.
Jed Lipsky, Lamoille 1, Stowe.
Richard Nelson, Orleans 1, Derby.
John O'Brien, Windsor Orange 1, that's relative my hometown town.
And we are down a few members today for a conference, and then Representative Burt is sugaring. It's an active farm committee, but thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to hear it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. As I said, I'm from Diggers Mirth Collective Farm, and we have been growing vegetables in the Intervale since the farm has been established since 1992. And we have 6 owners on our farm, and we employ anywhere from 1 to 3 people in our growing season. I'm here today to ask you to support S60. And thank you so much for your attention to this issue. My hope is that farmers aren't expected to carry the risk of extreme weather events on their own. And I want to share my story of how necessary the help from the state has been when our farm has experienced extreme flooding.
We have a question already.
Just for such context, Hillary, how many acres?
So we manage about 12 acres.
We've just been talking about how you can grow a lot of food on relatively small amount of acreage.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe I'm not sure if this committee has heard from my colleagues, but in the Intervale, we have about something in the area of like 60 acres in production shared amongst 6 different farms, as well as additional acreage in tree production that's managed by the Intervale Center, who is our landlord at my farm. So.
Can't see you, huh? Yeah, my hands aren't normally this clean, so.
Representative Morgan.
Who actually owns this land?
So the land is owned by the Intervale Center. We are
That's a
renters.
corporation and
That's a
they're-
nonprofit.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Any other questions before okay. So, all farmers, as you know, we're constantly dialing in our operations to respond to weather events, climate change, incrementally. And so, we have been adjusting as needed with different tools and practices and new varieties. And, we've never expected or been interested in assistance with this kind of thing, and since I've been farming, I joined the farm in 2002 because the farm is collectively owned, right? So we have multiple owners to our particular business. So I came on in 2002. And since then, we've had all kinds of flooding at various times in the season. And we've weathered those floods, but 2023 and 2024 were really devastating for our farm. Both of those floods resulted in 100% of crop loss just before the peak of the season. So all of our fruiting crops were just on the brink of fruiting, but we lost everything. In 2023, the value of that crop loss was $250,000. That's just of what got flooded, not of what was unable to be planted while we waited for the soil to dry out and questions of potential contamination to be addressed.
And
Yes.
that was just on your 12 acres?
That's just on our land, yeah, yep.
I mean, you know the loss on the Intervale Center as a whole, you know that number?
But someone will,
Okay, yeah, it'd be interesting.
yeah. Maybe Sam will.
You're gonna hear from Sam Smith from the Intervale Center, he might.
I can also find that out very easily and provide that to you later. So we received a tremendous amount of support from the state through BGAP, grants from NOFA Vermont. There was fundraising on behalf, by the Intervale Center. And we also received donations directly from people in our own community, directly to our farm. And with that support, we were able to hire back our crew, which we had temporarily laid off. And we replanted in the fall, and we were able to pay ourselves, the owner's wages, and continue on. I'll say we do have NAP insurance. Do you folks know what
Yeah.
NAP is?
Yeah, it's weak, but it's something.
Yeah, so to date, for our claim from 2023, we've received $1,300.
Yeah, it's weak.
There might be more coming. I don't even know. And
How much are your premiums for that?
we actually have it for free.
Yeah. That's what-
yeah.
Just like a crop
Yes.
for a dairy farm.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So, I've always heard like, oh, it's weak, they're not designed to work with diversified, small farms. In my experience, they're really, I think that's true. The system needs reforming. And I know that there are people in Washington who want to reform that. And the people at FSA are good people who want to help farms and be in service to agriculture. But they're vastly understaffed and overworked, and they're swimming in paperwork. They have apologized to me. They're like, we haven't cleared your paperwork from 2023. Sorry. So, meanwhile, we received a ton of support elsewhere.
I think we have one more question on this.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
we'll allow you to carry on.
Sorry, no, I just wondered how long it took for the BGAP money to arrive.
Didn't take long at all. I
Okay.
forget. It was very quick. It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And
Are you organic?
yes,
Okay.
I didn't give too much background, I didn't want to take up too much time. So thank you for asking the clarifying questions.
You don't get out of Tunbridge much, do you? The Intervale is this
Chelsea.
absolutely premier alluvial floodplain
For sure.
and with terrific, deep, fertile, black soils.
It's gorgeous.
It's
Worth it.
It is meant to grow vegetables. It really is.
That's Winooski River.
Yes.
Yeah.
Far from the mouth.
Minuscule loam, we're just down the river a few miles, and the other piece of it is we're in city limits of Burlington. So
You're
we're directly within one of the best markets in the state. So
I wondered, when you have floodwaters going over organic, then do you have to give it, a certain amount of time or do soil samples to make sure it
Yes.
doesn't have?
yes and yes. Yeah.
You know,
That's a whole universe of discussion that I don't want to drag us through right now, but we have, I'll say in 2023, we learned so much, and we are also really fortunate to have UVM right up the hill. So we have partners there, and we're working on intensifying our soil sample testing rigor, and even testing before, when we know a flood is approaching, which, thanks to NOAA and that funding, which hopefully stays in place, we can watch the river gauge in Essex and look at the predictions. So, we know how to prepare for flooding, and we got really good at it actually post 2023. So in 2024, we had learned a lot of lessons. We modified a lot on the farm and our crop plan. We had a flood plan in place. The Intervale Center has its own flood plan in place. We had a really incredible flood response. So we lost everything again, but our total crop loss was 40% less than what we had lost in 2023.
25, what was
250,000.
250?
Yeah. Again, we received BGAP funding and some donations, but it was all like, we needed less, we received less, but we needed less. And our crew continued to work. We replanted sooner because we actually replanted before we got our soil test result back. Kind of took a gamble, and the results, we felt confident that we could like carry on, but we had an incredible fall season. And so here we are again, we're, ready for 2025. We've made more modifications. We've fine-tuned our flood plan, but I just want to say that without that BGAP funding, without the community, there's just I can't see how we would be continuing to farm. And obviously, relying on like goodwill of neighbors, it's not a sustainable path forward. And so, our conclusion as a farm, is like this, we don't want to leave the Intervale, and we certainly don't want to stop farming. And really, we don't have the capacity to like up and leave. A lot of our equipment is cooperatively owned, and we have kids in the school system in Burlington. We're rooted in our community. So we're kind of like, after 2024, we were like, we need to, as a society, develop systems where we're sharing. If we value local food production, and if the majority of local food production is happening in floodplains, along rivers, in the valleys, in Vermont, in New England, in the country, in the world, like we need to figure out how to share the risk. So I'm just so humbled and amazed that at the work of folks to get this bill sort of rolling through, because I feel like it's a great approach. So
Representative Nelson.
Thank you.
thank you, folks. Yeah.
You're spot on with your comments, because our most productive agricultural lands in the floodplains. And it's the only thing we can do in the floodplains. We can't have housing in the floodplains. You can't have industry in the floodplains. We can't have commercial in the floodplains, but we can have agriculture. And we do skate that risk. In 23, we lost 400 acres of corn. Gone. And then in 24, we lost 100 and something. And so I absolutely feel your pain and know exactly where you're coming from. And I think this committee is full on board in how we address it and how we come to a working solution. Our losses, although dear to us, when you're talking a corn crop, you're talking $1,100 an acre. I'm interested in hearing your numbers. I've always heard vegetables were quite lucrative, and maybe I need to diversify a little bit, grow some vegetables, but that's, it's real, and I know it's real. Pete's Greens farms we farm around Pete's Greens, so.
Representative.
Yeah, I should clarify that we have 8 acres in production too, at every time. The rest is in cover crop. So
Yeah.
while we manage 12, it's like 8 in vegetables.
8 in vegetables, 4 in cover crop. What are you using for a cover crop? Like clovers and stuff?
We use peas and oats. We use
Peas.
Japanese millet, sometimes buckwheat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Winter wheat is a great one
Yes.
for a fall crop, because it's not it won't discourage your next year's crop from growing like winter rye will.
Well, like rye does, yeah.
All right.
I know it always gets us.
Rep. Lipsky.
Yeah, thank you. Just for your history, thank you for coming in, welcome. We, over the years, have had a number of folks from the Intervale come in and testify, but I want to shout out to NOFA and all your advocacy here over the year. But you haven't, sorry, heard, but in this committee, we have had a consensus that small crops, cash crop, food bank, Vermonters feeding Vermonters we have a total consensus that is our highest priority. In a time where there are restricted access to funds, you got a lot of needs, but this committee's been pretty much unanimous on supporting, like the Intervale. I bring Roundwood to McNeil. I'm in the forestry end of this committee, but and so in there, even on the land trust, we had growers of all ethnicities come and testify before us. With the uniqueness of the Intervale is special in its own right, just because of the diversity and what it does. So
Thank you.
you're among allies.
That's amazing. You
Or
should come down sometime and visit.
What are you doing Saturday? Oh, we're at the National Guard base
Oh,
Saturday.
Very nice. We will do that right offline. And thank you so much. If you would like to, that is all for you? Okay, great. Thank you very much. We love the enthusiasm from the committee. What do we have next?
Hillary did a much better job at being casual than I'm gonna be able to do.
You do what feels
You're gonna be
comfortable
great.
for you, and we welcome you. Just give us your introduction.
I'd like to thank the members of this committee for taking the time to hear my testimony. My name is Amanda Andrews, and this year I'm beginning my 16th season running a vegetable farm in our great state. I steward 25 acres in Plainfield, Vermont, acreage that was settled in 1792 and has been in continuous agricultural production since the Merino boom. I grow 7 acres of certified organic vegetables for local and regional wholesale markets and am a member farm of a 250 member CSA in the Mad River Valley. I'm speaking here today to ask you to support S60, the Farm Security Act. 16 years of farming. If my farm were my firstborn child, it would be learning to drive this year. If my farm were my firstborn child, you would empathize when I tell you about the first tenuous year where I constantly wondered, am I doing this right? Everyone else next to the Intervale seems to be doing this a lot better than me. And I'd recall the tumultuous second year when this toddling business was just finding its feet, that Tropical Storm Irene inundated my rented farmland with 6 feet of water, washing away a year's work and any chance at a profitable season. More than that event, I remember how it hushed all the self-doubt and confirmed to me the urgent importance of the work. The climate is changing. We need to develop and localize the skills our future demands. Carpentry, food production, equipment repair, conflict resolution, the list goes on, and farming touches them all. I needed to protect my young enterprise, so I gave up my prime river bottom soils and took on the debt to move to higher ground. The years since then have been filled with challenges: moving a farm, operating a farm, separating from and buying out my business partner, losing 100% of my retail market due to pandemic shutdowns, buying the historic farmhouse, and having 2 real children of my own. Farmers know about resilience, but none of these challenges have slowed down my business like the last 3 seasons. In 2022, we had 7 weeks of drought in the height of the summer season. I lost 3/4 of an acre of carrots and had historically low yields on crops that require a lot of summer water to size up meaningfully, like celeriac and potatoes. So I made significant investments in irrigation and carried on. And as everyone in this room knows, I would not have to break out that equipment much in the next 2 years. So now I'm on high ground and my farm does not flood, but I am located right smack in the center of the triangle created by Plainfield, Berry City, and Montpelier. So my farm doesn't flood. I made sure of that after the trauma of Irene, spending hours studying topo maps and tracing the surrounding rivers. But when you get 30 inches of rain in 5 weeks, it doesn't really matter. The result is much the same. saturated soils, rotting plants, lost nutrients, furloughed workers, hours spent researching loans and grants, late nights spent working and reworking the budget to see how many months I could pay my employees, cover insurance, mortgage, and utilities. All this while wondering, can I take another season like this? Beak has kept my farm afloat, absolutely. But will the state continue to have meaningful help if this happens again in 2025 or 2026? Unfortunately, in a country that subsidizes so much agriculture at the federal level, there's little federal aid or safety net for Vermont's scale of farm. To illustrate this, I'll share a little bit about my business's recovery. In 2023, using the BGAP formula that the state provided, I calculated my crop and equipment losses from the July storms to be $84,647. On July 2nd, 2025, I received my USDA NAP payment for $1,400.92. I waited 542 days for a payment that didn't cover a single cost of production. It didn't cover potting soil, fertilizer, or seeds, let alone big costs like labor or mortgage or insurance. If that payment were divided over the days I waited, it would be $2.75 a day. Would you bet the future of your firstborn on $2.75? I guess after 542 sleepless nights, the USDA figured they could buy me a cup of coffee. I know I'm but one in a long line of farmers to ask these existential questions about our industry. But passage of S60 could mean I'm one of the last. It could mean I can concentrate on keeping my employees working and teaching them to cook food from the land in these changing conditions. It means I can concentrate on adaptation practices, soil health, and stewarding my historic farmland at the top of the watershed. But creation of the Farm Security Fund would do so much more than just help me sleep at night. Because when you fund farms, you fund rural economies. Our farms are just a pass-through entity. These dollars help keep people in good white-collar jobs, like our agriculture insurance agent, rural lenders, and the nonprofit and university specialists that support us. We keep the local hardware store open, the seed company going, and the local restaurants filled. Our employees are the next generation of Vermonters. In 2025, 3 of my 4 farm employees are young Vermonters who were born here, left the state, and have since returned, drawn by the cultural renaissance that has small organic farms at its heart. Previous farm employees have gone on to become teachers, paraeducators, a commercial welder, a union organizer, 2 published authors, an electrical engineer, and the assistant to this very committee. And we, the farmers ourselves, are the volunteer firefighters and EMS that show up when you call. Our kids fill your rural schools. Our nights are spent at school and select board meetings. Investing in farms is investing in your watershed, in your landscape, and in your rural communities. It's preserving Vermont's agricultural past and ensuring Vermont's rural future. In closing, I'm asking you to pass S60 to create the Farm Security Fund to ensure that farmers and the communities that count on them know that there will be support come too much rain or too much shine. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Representative O'Brien.
Amanda, is there a formula to NAP? It seems like they're, you admit your losses and they're like, we'll give you 1/10 of a penny on them.
That's the way it feels. I agree with everything Hillary said, that my interactions with the FSA and with NAP have always been very supportive, and their hands are very tied by what federal policy is. My understanding is that the formulas are written for conventional ag, where the inputs costs are lower. The input costs for vegetable production are very high. Our labor is very high, and being organic, we're limited on what inputs we can use, and a lot of those costs of production are higher than conventional agriculture, but the formula doesn't take that into consideration.
Rick Nelson.
Pretty sure NAP covers uninsured crops.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it stands for, non-insured agricultural production.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of the catch-all for, there's no commercial insurance that fits diversified vegetable production. I don't know about Hillary, but we have 60 different varieties of vegetables, and as opposed to corn and soy, or corn, soy, and barley, where it's easier to have 3 crops with more accurate representation of the costs.
Do
It's,
you know how, on commodities size, soybeans, say, does it get up when there are losses, for corporate farmers, does it cover 50% sometimes?
You'll cover your expenses.
it's also, there's commercial options available. It's not even, we don't even have the option of going to a commercial insurance product. There's not one available.
It's spending. We have a saying in this state, in my circles, that a certain county in this state only has a disaster when they don't have a disaster. It's pricey. That's why a lot of farmers don't buy it, because except for 23 and 24, you don't have a claim. And you're writing that premium check, and you write that premium check for 10 years, you have a claim, you're behind.
Right.
Now, you have a claim 2 years in a row. I want to pass S60, just like putting on a raincoat when they're threatening rain, and then it doesn't rain. You question why you put the raincoat on, but we pass S60, maybe we'll quit having these,
Funds don't go away.
the funds don't go away, they stay there, and we can build them. And so, because the amount of money we're earning, they showed us 58 million. And I said it was probably double that, and it probably was double that. If everyone claimed did you lose equipment? Not, or not so much in your case?
Because we don't inundate, we don't have inundation flooding. I lost my wellhead pump because my farm took a direct lightning strike.
Yeah.
And I lost a weed whacker that was in ponding water.
Oh, wow.
A weed whacker,
Yeah.
spring trimmer that was in
Yeah.
ponding water. But I've lost a tractor to flooding before. I have insurance for that.
I got that.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
the crop, it's really hard to insure. The other thing is with vegetables, our budget isn't just based on our inputs. It's input A plus labor equals our profit margin, and our budget is based off of that. And the payouts are not based off of that. So it's hard to document the losses of the projected income that all of your expenses are based around, when a lot of the formulas are based on the loss of the input cost.
Did you get BGAP money?
I did get BGAP both years very rapidly. I think 4 weeks to get that money. And it was also, in 2023, it was very quickly publicized that there was this program that was going to be available. And so it really helped to know, because I knew that NAP would take forever and that it was going to be nothing. It was shockingly closer to nothing than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
I expected it to be more than $1,400 on an $85,000 loss. But knowing that BGAP was coming and that it was going to be significant because the formula was published, so you could kind of look at your spreadsheet and say, okay, I should be getting around X amount of money. And so I know what expenses I can pay. I know what employees I can keep, was extremely helpful. And then in 2024, the word on the street was BGAP's not coming this time. Don't expect it. That was what farmers were told very early on. And so that was extremely nerve-wracking to try to figure out, how am I going to close this gap without BGAP, which is what saved us last time. So I'm very grateful that BGAP funds were made available in 2024. But one of the most appealing things about S60 is that we'll know it's there. We'll know that we'll have access to that money. So when a disaster does happen, it's not the panic of where's money going to come from? How do I find it? Who am I competing with to get it? We'll know that it's there. We'll become familiar with the formulas and know what expenses we'll be able to cover. Because in those first few weeks after these flooding events, you're immediately trying to triage. Do I keep on employees, or do I buy more seeds to replant? Because I might not have enough money to do both. And it's not what any of us got into farming to do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That is such a poignant end to that and really demonstrates the clear need for this. Thanks. Who do we have next? Who do we like?
Sam?
Sam, are you with us?
Saw Sam.
Sam.
Yeah, I'm here.
Can you hear us okay, Sam?
I can hear you really well. Yep.
Okay, great. We can hear you as well. So whenever you are ready, if you would start with an introduction.
That'd be great. I wish I could join you there in person. Probably not a good idea today. But yeah, so thank you, Amanda, for teeing me up. My name is Sam Smith. I'm the Farm Business Director at the Intervale Center. The funding for my position is primarily through the Vermont Farm and Forest Viability Program, and I've been providing direct technical assistance to farmers for about 13 years now. I work with about 30 farms a year, and I work with farms from concept to exit. I specialize in mid to larger farms and value-added food businesses, and I do quite a bit of transfer planning at this point. I have 3 other business planners that work with me. We work with about 120 farms and food businesses a year, and we focus on building business management skills and viable farm businesses. I think Amanda is a great example of a farm who has participated in our programs and very much views her farm as a business and runs it as a business. We work with diverse farms across the state. So I work with everybody from, well, I haven't worked with an emu farm yet, but I've worked with large dairies down to startup vegetable enterprises. We see about 60% of our farm clients are in the first 3 to 5 years of business. And that's one of the points that I want to stress today is that as we see a shift in the farm economy away from commodity dairy, we have a really diverse farm mix, but a lot of those are young, new and beginning farmers that are assuming a huge amount of risk. Amanda is a great example of it. Once again, these farms provide nutritious food to our communities. Their kids are the kids that are in our local schools. They're the backbone of our local communities. They serve on our select boards and our volunteer fire departments. They provide jobs, and every dollar spent at those farms has an exponential impact on our local economy. Farming is risky and the economics are challenging, even in a stable environmental and political climates. Climate change has only increased that risk. Global and national food systems are fragile and unsustainable. We saw that in COVID. Our local food systems and the types of food production we had in our state really benefited our local communities when those national and international supply chains were impacted by the pandemic. And I think we're in the process of seeing that again with the political turmoil that's happening now. But we're here to talk about climate change and the impacts of climate change on our farms. Hillary's going to talk about it, but the Intervale, I work at the Intervale. I don't farm at the Intervale, but the Intervale has been profoundly impacted by flooding, especially in the last 3 years. What we saw was essentially a 1,000-year flood event, and then a year to the day afterward, we saw the same 1,000-year flood event impact the farm community there. It had a really profound impact on the farmers. Hillary can talk about that. But I think what we're seeing is more and more that what used to be a 100-year flood or a 1,000-year flood is, a much more likely possibility that it's going to happen on a 10-year timeline or even less than that. And farmers are notorious for being able to adapt to their environment or their market. But I think the level of climate instability that we're seeing is not representative of the types of risk that they can assume on their own. Another point that we discussed when we were working on this bill was that, maybe there's been a discussion of abandoning some of the agricultural land, especially in the floodplains. And there has been a movement to do some of that in terms of buying out really high risk areas. But the reality is those floodplains have the most valuable agricultural soils for the most part. The other thing is we're not just seeing flood events, we're seeing climate events across the board. When we testified to the Senate Ag Committee, we had a great orchard that I had worked with down in southern Vermont who lost 100% of their crop with the frost in 2023. And that also impacted the majority of the vineyards and the orchards in the state. So it's not just flooding, it's also these extended rain events. Crop insurance programs, like you heard from Amanda, really don't meet the needs of our small and mid-scale farms here in the state. They're usually calculated based on commodity pricing, which our farms rely on higher direct market margins to be able to produce enough income to be able to meet the needs of their farms and families. And what happens is when you apply those commodity rates and then some of the discounting that the federal or even state programs provide, you end up with a really small payout. What you heard from Amanda has been sort of the experience of the majority of producers that I've worked through this process with. So they really don't support small and mid-scale diversified producers in particular. And so what we had a broad group of farm-based organizations that got together to put together the bones of this legislation. And it was a really productive and cooperative group. And what we came up with was the structure that you see now. And it was based on sort of the experiences that producers had had with these other programs. NOFA Vermont's emergency fund was by far the most responsive fund, and it allowed farmers to access cash immediately. And that's what farmers need, especially when their farm floods on July 3rd. You can't wait around for a year to get a payout that you don't know if it's going to come or not when you're trying to keep your employees in place or buy seeds, like Amanda was saying. The Intervale farmers, and Hillary will probably talk about this, they turn right around and replant. And they were able to, especially last year, salvage a season with like a really decent fall in terms of the growing environment. But it doesn't lessen the shock of that initial event. And what
Thank you. Could I pause you for just one moment? We have a question.
Sam, you just touched on it, and maybe Hillary and Amanda could talk about this too, but I wondered if like your job now as technical assistants is strategizing with farmers and saying, instead of growing a 100-day variety or something, maybe start thinking like, oh, a flood may happen. And so how do you pivot to those like fall crops? So you're doing 250-day, vegetables or something, along those lines, because if you're in the floodplain and what you're saying about, flooding, you don't want to bet, all of your income on a very long growing season, perhaps.
Yeah, all of our business planning processes right now address climate event mitigation as part of that process. So whether it's, I was just talking with a vineyard, I'm working with a couple of vineyards right now, and a number of them have staggered their pruning practices to try and push the bud break to later in the season. Things like that. We're always, at the root of it, we always focus on like understanding cash flow, cash position, really understanding your financials and being able to pivot. But it is adapting to the potential impacts of climate change. I think the Veg and Berry Growers Association does a great job of really promoting group learning within their constituency to sort of understand like how to use cover cropping and how to use lower no-till to mitigate the potential impacts of flooding. And then what you were talking about, the Intervale farmers, a lot of them have tried to identify other potential growing areas for their long season crops that are not flood prone and really focusing on those quick short-term crops, potentially high margin crops like greens or lettuce, things like that they can replant quickly if they need to. So yeah, climate mitigation, from a planning perspective is one of our like paramount concerns right now with all producers. Yeah, so just to go back to the bill, it's like this fund at its heart sets up a process and structure that allows for a quickly administered emergency fund for farmers when these events hit. And I think that at the heart of our planning process, that really was what we were trying to get through this legislation, right? You know, I know there's been discussion around what level to fund it at. I think that at the core of it, the real outcome that we need to see is that we have a process in place, because it's not an if, it's a when at this point. You know, Amanda, I think, reinforced it, that we are going to see climate impacts on our farmers, and they can mitigate it from a production and cash flow standpoint, but we need to have a fund in place because we're asking them to assume a huge amount of risk just by starting up a farm and growing food, and we need to support them as a community through this type of legislation. So, yeah, that, you know, in closing, it's been really heartening to work on this process for this legislation. From my perspective, I work with a lot of farms every year. I know that the potential political instability right now is weighing very heavily on them. And when I talk to them about this bill and this potential fund, it's really heartening to hear them say, that's wonderful. That's what we need, is something that can help us mitigate the risk of all these environmental factors that we're seeing out there. As they're thinking about production, they really are the heart of our communities, and they really are just the backbone of this state that relies on agricultural production for its character and its working lands, and it's the people who visit. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. And I think the other contextual element of this to recognize is that for so long we've been relying on philanthropy as something to fill those gaps for farmers. And I think it's been so clear for the past 5 years that that is no longer the sustainable option. It requires a statewide response to what is happening for our farmers. We want resilient agricultural economies to exist in our state. So thank you so much. And I'll open it up to the committee. Sean?
Sam, amongst the agricultural community, is there any discussion about how we could pay for this fund? You know, should there be a dedicated source for it? Or just come out of the general fund?
We did not talk about a funding mechanism. We felt that there should be a dedicated source, or that it should come out of the general fund. I think the challenge is that these events are going to happen, and so we're going to end up pulling this money from somewhere else when it happens in an emergency situation. And so the goal here was really to, like I said before, have a structure in place, and then, you know, potentially fund it to a certain level, and then really have it there so it can be contributed to. The other thing that we had talked about was, you know, we saw a lot of community support and philanthropic dollars that flowed into the Intervale, and then also to farmers through GoFundMe's and to the NOFA emergency fund. And I think the structure of this fund could potentially allow for that type of money to flow in, which I think would be really nice. I think folks in our communities really acknowledge the importance of the farms to them. And so it would allow for a mechanism for funds to come from other areas than just the general fund. But we didn't talk in depth about where it would come from.
Any further questions from the committee? Great. Thank you so much, Sam. And
Thank you.
was that a question?
No.
No, okay. And I think we'll turn it over to Mike, if you are ready.
Hi, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you wonderfully.
I'm trying to talk all the way from Post Mills, Vermont, so if you can't hear me, I'll yell louder. So first of all, my name is Mike Snow. I run Post Mills Eggs and Grains, and Post Mills, I rent land here and in Fairleigh, Vermont. I also have a part-time off-farm job, which is the executive director of the Connecticut River Watershed Farmers Alliance. We're a group of farmers. We're one of the three main, or I should say, three larger watershed groups in the state. We represent tens of thousands of acres here in our watershed, down in the Connecticut Valley, immediate to the river, but then also up in the High Point. Some of you here could be members, in fact. Pardon me, sorry about that. We have farmers who are large dairies, we have small dairies, we have grass dairies, we have people who buy and feed, poultry, beef, vegetables, fruit, honey. We do have emus. I don't know if Sam's still on the line, but I got an emu guy for you. So just to say, we're a pretty broad network, and work with people who farm in a lot of different ways. And you've heard from Hillary and Amanda and Sam all the major points, right? So I don't want to go over those in detail, but mostly to say that this isn't just something for small diversified farms. This is something that all different kinds of farms in Vermont can use, right? If anything, it's even more important for some of us who don't sell direct and don't have as easy access to, say, GoFundMe or something like that, for a variety of reasons, but still have the potential to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars and still need to make payroll and still need to cover the cost of replanting and new seed. And for some of our growers, that means, who aren't as diversified, that means trying to make do with floods that hit at any moment, it's not always going to be July 10th, being able to find some way to pivot, even if you're growing a crop that is generally one and done during the season, right? So I guess I kind of want to make the point that we're part of a pretty broad coalition of farming groups that support this, and it really kind of warmed my heart to read that the Senate committees and the Senate itself passed this unanimously. It actually, we thought that we know that this is a tough ask this year, right? I mean, we're asking for a large amount of money in a year where we're trying to tighten budgets, and we appreciate that. But the difficulty of your work, but knowing that there's so much support because this is a very real need, right? This is an immediate risk to many farms. Some of our farms are a breakdown away or a lost crop away from financial disaster, and we manage risk in so many ways, but there's some risks that are difficult to bear without help from the community in some way.
Mike, would you mind if we paused you for a quick question?
Yeah.
Rep. Nelson.
Thank you. Mike, I believe you have a member that might be somewhat of a pumpkin farmer down there.
Yeah, one of our smaller farms. Yeah. One of our small farms.
Yeah, and it wasn't in July, but in recent history, I believe his pumpkins were right at harvest, and there could be pumpkins purveyed all the way down the Connecticut River from his farm, if I remember right.
Oh yeah, no, they're definitely so. So he's referring to we have a large dairy who also has diversified and does some vegetables and some pumpkins, which is what, 100 acres, something like that.
Maybe 275,
something like that. Yeah, and these are some of the great soils of Vermont and New Hampshire, right along the Connecticut. which is controlled with dams, but still, especially where he is, we have, without going into too much detail, a great flooding potential. But one of the reasons why we got involved with this particular issue is one of our farms is a neighbor of the pumpkin grower, and he's been there for 50, 60 years. He grows, he's the emu farmer, among other things, but he grows field crops. And he was hit so hard the last two flooding cycles, including the winter flood of 23, 24. He's in a really bad way. And for him, the federal programs didn't provide much relief. BGAP helped, but he's a different situation, and he's just a challenge, right? Anyways, I didn't want to get too far into that, but we go ahead. Sorry.
No, please. I think there was a follow-up to that.
Do you cover all the way up into Guildhall too with your watershed group, Mike, up to Matt?
Oh, yeah.
Lanahan?
We're up in
absolutely devastated the last 2 years with his potatoes.
Yeah. So he's actually moved out of the floodplain for his potatoes, and he's in a good situation where he's able to do that, and not all of us can. We have a vegetable grower who got hit 2 years in a row. They have 10 acres of their vegetables are down in the valley, like the low floodplain. And he's wondering, like, what do I do? Do I give this up? This is our main field, our main production field. Do we just quit on it? And does it get bought out? The thing is that even if he floods 3 years out of 10, the other years are still, like, they're good enough, right? So for him, there's some risk management, and it may still be worth it. He hasn't decided yet. He is moving uphill also. But in the meantime, when he's lost tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash flow, immediate revenue, he needs to meet payroll. He was really fortunate that between BGAP and GoFundMe and his community that he built, he was able to weather it. But again, a lot of our farms can't rely on all of that.
Great. Representative O'Brien?
Like, I just wondered, you have member farms on both sides of the Connecticut?
We do, yeah.
Yeah, and then like Gladstone's probably owns at least farm in New Hampshire too, right? So I just wondered, is this something technically for us to figure out? If, do you have to be a Vermont farmer with the land you farm in New Hampshire, if it gets flooded, not be eligible? Just some technical details, I guess, because the Connecticut is unusual that way.
It's a great question. Yes, you need to figure that out. I'm not sure. That would be something to look into in terms of whether farmers who live in New Hampshire but farm on the left side can access, cover crop money, for example, if they're cover cropping the Vermont land. That's a good question. Yeah, I don't have an answer to that yet.
And I don't know if BGAP covered, either of those scenarios. New Hampshire-based farmers who farm in Vermont or vice versa.
There are relatively few New Hampshire-based who farm on the left side. There are some, especially farther south, I think, and far north. And I don't know the answer. But I'd love to help figure that out if you'd like.
Thank you.
I think if you grow corn on the Connecticut River on the Vermont side, even though you're farming, if you're on the other side, you could qualify for the money to grow cover crop on it on the Vermont side. But you'd have to do something with New Hampshire on the other side.
We should ask the
I don't-
agency for commerce whether the VCAP covered some of those situations.
I mean, I wouldn't imagine that there are any New Hampshire farmers that are expecting the Vermont program to cover losses that on what they're farming in New Hampshire, certainly. You or a Vermont farmer who would expect the opposite,
Yeah.
Great, well, are there any further questions from the committee or any closing thoughts you have, Mike?
No, I think one thing that Amanda said that has kind of stuck with me while I've been listening is knowing the formula, and BGAP has been good, but having something that's standing, reliable. I mean, when we first started talking about this, we sort of put out 3 things, right? Reliable, easy, fast. Maybe that's 4 things. Maybe it'll be 4 things, and sufficient, right? Something that we know is there. We're not going to become lazier about our risk management as farmers. I mean, that's not the intention of this, but knowing that there's a backstop, most larger farms in the country have a backstop. And many of us really don't. So that's really the main thing here. And just want to reiterate that. But thank you very much for considering.
No, thank you so much. And that point is very well taken. Is anybody else at the end?
No, you're not gonna
Oh
enlighten us.
Can I say one quick thing?
my gosh, yes.
Maddie Hebner, no Vermont for the record. I live on Pumpkin Harbor Road in Cambridge. To your point and Mike's point about the pumpkins, that is exactly the story of why the road that I live on is named as it is. And I learned from Brave Little State that it was pre-1927 flood, actually.
They went down the river.
Mhm. Yeah. But there's a place on my road that was called Pumpkin Harbor after that storm. Like,
They were-
probably
It's
200
got to
years
be
ago.
out
They all ended up in Naderville.
Not there, that's
Not
where
there,
the
it's
oil.
Old Moyle, yeah, exactly.
Lemoyle.
They ended up
Oh,
at-
yeah.
No.
Well, thank you so much. We are really, really grateful for all of your testimony. And I think the committee is quite eager to also get this through. And we will go off live.